We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for? Those masters of the universe are at it again.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. This is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And today we have two of our researchers who have been to different parts of the border to report what's going on or not going on in this new arrangement now that President Trump has apparently reasserted control over the border. Is everything hunky-dory? Is there still something going on? And so we have joining us Art Arthur and Todd Bensman, who went to the San Diego, Tijuana area and El Paso, Juarez, respectively. And so I thought it would be good to hear from them what's going on and maybe, compare and contrast kind of thing. So, Art, why don't we start with you? You went down to San Diego and Tijuana. What'd you see? Is there anything going on there?
Well, it's interesting because what I saw was not much to see. The Mexican military, both the National Guard and the Defensa, are on the other side. In fact, they've set up encampments on the southern side of the border fence, and they are actively keeping people from crossing over the border. We now have a full cadre of Border Patrol agents on the line because they're no longer getting pulled off the line to transport and process migrants. I also saw a large contingent of U.S. Marines. The U.S. Marines are between the two fences in San Diego sector. There's both primary and secondary fencing in a lot of areas. And the Marines are actively putting up concertina wire at the top of the wall, in the middle of the wall, and at the bottom of the wall in order to deter people from crossing over. So things have definitely changed in San Diego sector. That was the second busiest sector of the 9 Border Patrol sectors over the last 2 years. There were 325,000 almost apprehensions there in FY 2024. That dropped to a monthly total of 6,390 in January and then down to 1,650 in February. 266 of those migrants were in family units compared to 75,000 last year. And just 53 of those migrants were unaccompanied alien children. So, yeah, things have definitely changed significantly in San Diego sector over, just a matter of weeks. And morale is high. The agents were, glad to be on the line rather than in detention centers or processing centers. So things have definitely picked up in San Diego.
Interesting. I mean, if you're talking 1,600 something or other in February, we're talking, what is that? Like 50 or 60 a day or something?
Yeah, just over 50 apprehensions per day. In fact, the vehicles were more or less standing point. There's full forward deployment in San Diego sector. So they were either standing point or they were patrolling along the border between San Ysidro, Otay Mesa, and Tijuana, which is a massive, sprawling city on the other side. And keep in mind, Mark, as you know, but for our listeners who haven't been there, San Diego sector actually starts at Imperial Beach, literally starts in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it goes inland. Now, the one development that they did tell me about is that they're seeing an increase in maritime incursions.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. That's been happening for a while, where they take boats up the coast and then come in. Is that it?
Yeah, they're commonly referred to as pangas, small boats that, will go up the coast and will beach somewhere north of the border. There have been a couple of people who have attempted to just simply cross there at Imperial Beach, but by and large, they've been going further north, and that is somewhat of a complicating factor. unless Border Patrol is actually tracking them with the assistance of their compatriots in air and marine operations. Because California is currently implementing Senate Bill 54, SB 54, which is a huge sanctuary state bill that limits the amount of assistance that state and local officials can offer to Border Patrol. And, oftentimes it's just a lifeguard, a California state lifeguard who's there, and the California state lifeguards aren't calling Border Patrol. They're attempting to save the people who find themselves in distress. But yeah, unfortunately, there have been deaths that have been associated with those. Marina Thames Pangas are not very seaworthy vessels. And again, we're not talking about blocks from the international border. We're talking about miles from the international border in some pretty rough tides. So all of it is problematic from a life-saving standpoint, and even from a security standpoint. But it really speaks more to the degree to which Border Patrol, with the help of all that infrastructure, is able to seal off the land border.
Right. Interesting. So, Todd, you were in El Paso, Juarez, which is, 900 miles to the east. And it's on the water, but it's on a river, not on the ocean. So what did you see when you were there?
Sure. First of all, that sector, that's the El Paso sector, which stretches covers El Paso, obviously, but it also covers most of New Mexico as well.
Right.
That area is, for the last 4 years has just been pummeled by hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens crossing. And I've been going there for all of those 4 years, and it's just mass chaos every time I went there. This time, there was nothing happening. There was some sand blowing around. I mean, really, it was just night and day. And it's one thing to read the numbers and the statistics online, but it's really quite another thing to get your feet on the ground and go find out what's really going on. And so I spent a couple of days on the Juarez side talking to immigrants, and that's where you really learn a lot when you talk to the immigrants and you look around over there. And there are many in Juarez who got, caught when the last gate slammed shut, when they shut down the CBP-1 parole scheme, interview scheme, as Art likes to call it. And they got caught over there, and then...
In other words, they got stuck on the Mexican side without an appointment. Yeah. The
big change, of course, was Border Patrol, instead of admitting everybody in that were giving up to them, decided, or, they didn't decide, they were ordered to start capturing and detaining and deporting them. And so they're all very well aware that their odds of ever making it into the United States by illegally crossing or trying to give themselves up, which was what most of them did. There were give-ups and runners who would get away, that, they're going to lose their money if they try that. And they're very keenly aware of that. I interviewed.
In other words, the smuggling fees they paid would go to naught, basically. They'd be wasted.
That's right. And in fact, the smuggling fees now ranged up to about $4,000 per person. And that did not include guided trips on the other side, to sort of evade Border Patrol and the military who are out hunting them now. You just get dropped over on the Texas side and left to your own devices, in which case you're going to probably get caught pretty quickly. So the ones I talked to said, I'm not even going to bother putting that kind of money down if that's what's going to happen. But interestingly, there was another disincentive that I hadn't heard really before. They're putting us in jail. They're prosecuting us. We're going to get prosecuted. And so I looked into that a little bit more. And what's actually happening is more and more, I don't have numbers on this yet. I think it's too early. More of the ones that are being apprehended are being referred to prosecution for 1325 and 1326 violations, illegal entry. And then once they're convicted, they'll usually cop a plea or whatever. They'll be given some jail time. The ones that have crossed multiple times will sometimes be given a lot of jail time, prison time, federal prison time. they get put back over with 5-year bans on reentry and sometimes lifetime bans. And a number of the immigrants I talked to over on the other side were very keenly aware of this. It's the first time I've heard them say, oh, I'm afraid of prosecution.
And just to fill in for listeners, crossing the border illegally is a criminal offense, but it's also a civil offense. And so it's usually dealt with as a civil offense. But there have been instances in the past, and it's encouraging that we're seeing it now too, where they prosecute people for the criminal violation of entering without inspection. Now, unlike Art was talking about how California has the sanctuary policies, Texas obviously very different. They've engaged in extensive activity using their own state law enforcement to try to do what the feds under the Biden administration refused to do. So, do they need all those people? Do they still have all those people at the border since the feds have now basically stepped up and are doing their job again?
Right. Texas Department of Public Safety and Texas National Guard were always very ubiquitous, very obvious, in your face, all over the El Paso sector. Behind, they built all these bulwarks and barbed wire, concertina wire fencing, and really, were firing pepper balls at charging mobs of immigrants, and really just a lot of crazy chaos, always featuring Texas Department of Public Safety troopers and CID and Rangers, that sort of thing. This time, I couldn't find one. There was not a single Texas DPS patrol car the entire week that I was there. Couldn't find it. When I asked what happened, I was told that they've all been withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
They've been moved off of the border because, this kind of duty for the last 4 years, they come in, they're put on the ground for 1 and 2 week tours that are rotating multiple times a year, very devastating to families. It's a real grind on these officers for years. And now there's so few crossing, the decision was made to just pull them off the line and have them go do something in the interior that's useful.
Right. And so these are officers from from Dallas, Houston, whatever, were sent down to the border for these rotations that, away from their families and everything.
That's right. It's called Operation Lone Star. $11 billion was spent on this over the last 4 years. And this was not an insignificant, the purpose of it was to keep, a big purpose of it, not the sole purpose, was to really keep the illegal aliens from reaching Border Patrol agents that were always behind them.
Right.
Because the Border Patrol agents were admitting them into the country very quickly. And so the idea was, we got to keep them away from the Border Patrol.
Interesting.
That's all, of course, been switched around on a swivel. And Border Patrol now is the enemy. And so there's enough of them not in processing centers and not, admitting them, thousands in every day, taking care of babies and all that. They're hunting and deporting now.
They're actually doing the job of Border Patrol agents, in other words, right?
That's right. And that's a very potent drug to be able to get to do your job after 4 years, and they're all high on it.
Right.
Just like Art said, they love this. One other thing I want to mention here is you have to remember that the border crisis was always about two different subcategories of illegal immigrants. One was those who were giving themselves up.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of video footage. They would just file in and very placidly just turn themselves over to Border Patrol and be processed in. The ones with criminal records or something to hide or whatever reason couldn't turn themselves in, would cut through the fence, climb over the fence with smugglers and run through the gaps and get to the interstate and go to stash houses and into the country. Well, 2.4 million of those later, a massive record of those, by the way. I took a good look on both sides of a very, very notorious stretch of wall, Bush-era wall on both sides of the border where they cut holes in this thing, and it's a runner territory. I've written about this for us.
Right.
I've done videos of us being there, and the Border Patrol agents in the area said that they now have 0 days of runners. The runners and got-away numbers have plummeted along with all the rest of it. And that's very important to know because that's a high, degree of criminality in that category.
Right.
And it's very important that number is low. And I met a welder who his job is to repair holes in that fence that get cut.
Right.
And he said, it used to be I'd do 10 or 12 a day. He says, now I just do, 1 or 2 or 3 a day.
Okay.
The numbers are really low. They have 0 coming through. There are no footprints in the sand. I mean, it's really remarkable and important to know that the runners and gotaways are way down too.
Right. Interesting. So, Art, obviously California wasn't doing the kind of thing Texas was in, trying to fill in the gaps under Biden, where the Border Patrol under Biden wasn't allowed to do its job. But you said the Mexican government has stepped up, and this is something that has been touted to some degree by the White House. A little more on that? What did you see as far as a Mexican presence on their side to stop people from coming across?
Yeah, so as soon as I crossed through the pedestrian entry into Tijuana, the first person that greeted me on the other side was a Mexican National Guardsman. And again, they are deployed along the fence, out along the border to stop individuals from crossing over. So, and again, Todd had reported on this. There's been a lot of national reporting on this, that about 10,000 Mexican National Guard troops were sent after President Trump made his first tariff threat to Mexico to bolster the border, to cut down on not only the migrants, but the drugs, primarily fentanyl, that was coming over that border. And they are on the line. I didn't want to take a picture of this fella. He looked like he was tough business. but they are there. And, to paint a picture, Tijuana, near the port of entry, is absolutely bustling. People all around, but, none of those people are going to, make it over that wall into the United States. And they've actually done something very interesting in the San Ysidro port of entry. It used to be, if we can remember back in the days, the yellow sign with the family running across the highway,
Sure.
It said caution because migrants would run through the ports. The actual physical port of entry is now blocks away from where you enter into the streets of San Ysidro. And so, if anybody does attempt to run through the port, CBP, Office of Field Operations, and Border Patrol has plenty of space in which to catch them.
So they can't just get lost in a warren of buildings, because once you cross, you haven't gotten anywhere yet, right? Is that what it amounts to?
Yeah. You haven't gotten anywhere, and there's wall and fencing along the actual exit way from the port of entry and the entryway into the port of entry. So it makes the streets down there a little bit confusing when you're riding along them, because there's a sign that tells you to make a left into Mexico, which is north. But yeah, so it loops around and cuts into Mexico that way. But I do want to echo something that Todd had said about the prosecutions. There are 2 different U.S. attorneys' offices handle San Diego sector, both the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District. And both are taking those 1326 cases, the reentry after deportation cases, and they're taking a fair number of 1325 cases, which are, your simple illegal entries. You mentioned before, entering the United States is a crime. It's a misdemeanor that you can get up to 6 months in jail for the first time, and a felony subject to 2 years or more the second time that you do it, even without a removal order. So yeah, ramping up the criminal prosecutions of those individuals is absolutely crucial. It's important for listeners to know that there are 3 main deterrent tools that the U.S. government DHS uses down there. The first one, of course, is infrastructure, the fencing along the border, especially the double line fencing and, the concertina wire, that's a huge impediment. The second deterrent is the Border Patrol agents themselves. And as I noted, they're all forward deployed. They're all, hard up against the border where they can, intercept anybody that makes it past the fence. But the third deterrent, and this is, often the most powerful deterrent, are those criminal prosecutions. Congress decades ago made it a crime to enter the United States, but various administrations, have used that tool more or less. There was a steep drop during COVID when detention space in Bureau of Prisons was limited. And then the Biden administration, even as we saw a surge of people coming legally to the United States, never really ramped up the prosecutions. They did for the smugglers under 1324, but they didn't do it for the illegal entrants themselves.
I just want to point out, I talked to a very good federal source who is right in the middle of all of this prosecution stuff.
Right.
And this source told me that these immigrants are being flown from all parts of the United States for these prosecutions into the Western District, at least. And the reason is because they have to be prosecuted where they committed the crime. So if they're from Denver, they're coming from Chicago, New York, being referred. And I'm sure there's an expense to this. The fact that the government is willing to put up with this expense shows you that they also recognize what a powerful deterrent prosecution is. I did pick up on the other side from immigrants who are not lawyers. They're going to put us in prison for 2 years.
Interesting. Yeah. So the deterrent that Art was talking about, in a sense, Art, what you're talking about is kind of a legal wall. In other words, it's not a physical wall. It's a wall of law, a wall of prosecution if you cross illegally.
Yeah. And, it's important to understand why that's such a powerful tool. Under the Biden administration, more than 88.5% of all migrants who entered the United States illegally were simply released. And we know from various court decisions and, analyses that, both Todd and I in the center have done that, when you release those individuals, you're just going to get more of them.
Of course.
Because that's going to be, it gives them the ability to live and work in the United States indefinitely. If you cross illegally and you're not only going to be civilly detained. And by the way, I was told that everybody who enters illegally now is being detained. Nobody's being released. But if in addition to that, you're facing the prospect of 6 months in a federal penitentiary, and I had jurisdiction over 2 of them, and they're not fun places, that is truly a huge impediment because not only are you out your smuggling fees, but you're basically not able to do any work for, 6 months, 2 years or longer, which is why I say that it is the most powerful deterrent at the border. None of us wants to go to federal penitentiary, but none of us wants to come to the United States, spend a lot of money to do that, only to end up getting free room and board at government expense, only to face removal at the end. So, it truly is a powerful tool. And that was one of the first things that I was told when I got down there was the degree to which both the Central District and the Southern District of California have expanded their prosecutions for those illegal entrants. Todd makes an important point, part of which, isn't 100% germane to what we're talking about, but, as Tom Homan, is implementing the president's mass deportation plan, a lot of people are being arrested not on immigration detainers, but on federal judicial warrants. Those are issued by magistrate judges, federal district court judges.
Interesting.
And, when those are issued, even sanctuary cities, with one glaring exception in Tompkins County, New York, honor those federal warrants, and they will detain those people for those warrants. So it's, crucial to note that. And, I can tell you right now, federal judges don't like it when you ignore their warrants.
Yeah, that's a point. Interesting point is that if they issue more regular criminal warrants for, entry without inspection, is it likely? And I think the answer is yes. But is it likely that more sanctuary jurisdictions will say, well, that's a judicial warrant that we're not going to honor because it's just for crossing the border illegally, and we don't think that should be illegal.
Sure, if you want to be held in contempt by a federal judge, which again is one of those things none of us really wants to do. Honestly, I think a lot of these sanctuary jurisdictions, we're doing it as an affront to the first Trump administration. They're like, we're a sanctuary, we're not going to play along. But I think that, in cities and towns across the United States, we've seen a lot of those sanctuary jurisdictions start to see the impact of what they're doing. And increased school sizes, strained medical resources, increased costs. So, I'm not going to say that, this is categorical or even that it exists, but I would envision that a lot of those sanctuary jurisdictions are probably happy to, get that judicial warrant so they could say, we're still, we still care about our migrants, but not about our federal criminals.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that would sort of give sanctuary cities a kind of way, sort of in their context, a face-saving way to stop being sanctuary cities in some sense. Although,
yeah, exactly.
Although the bar has got to be kind of high, because if a Border Patrol agent is observing a person entering without inspection, then there's really not much doubt there. But if someone 2 years ago crossed in El Paso and lives in Chicago now, it's a little harder, isn't it, to determine that this is where they committed the crime of illegal entry?
Well, when you look at the population of people, again, more than 6 million people who are apprehended and released into the United States.
Oh, I see.
We have proof that they were apprehended and released. With respect to the gotaways, it's going to be more of a complicated issue.
Todd, you were saying something?
I agree with that. I was just going to go back to the Mexican troops just for a quick moment here, because I was looking for them on the Juarez side too. I know they deployed in a big way in Tijuana where Art went, but they also deployed in a big way in Juarez. Mm-hmm. And so I went over there, and what I expected to see was what we've seen, a lot of video on TV where they've got soldiers on the vehicle line going north, waiting to go through the port for inspection and then enter the U.S. trucks and cars. And you see the video, and they're tossing every vehicle, going through the trunk. And
I see. Yeah.
Looking through the baby food and all that kind of thing. And that's what I sort of expected to see. But I went on 2 different days to all 3 vehicle lines to go through the different ports. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see anything like that. Just a couple of sort of, National Guard. That's the usual number anyway. There's always some National Guard around the ports. But I was looking for it. It could have been that it just wasn't happening on the 2 days that I happened to be there. But the point I think I'm making, this is that they're looking for fentanyl.
Right.
Trying to it's counter fentanyl operations. That's the big, don't tariff us. We'll take care of the fentanyl. So I just had to wonder if what happened is they let American media in bed with them and then put on a big show for them.
Right.
Tossing cars and trucks. I didn't see it.
Interesting. So that when the show was over and people and the media left, then the show ended. That's interesting.
Just an observation.
I had one last question. We're getting to about half an hour. Question for you, Art, about this maritime thing. In other words, people trying to basically go up the coast. I assume something like this happens on the Gulf Coast as well, but on the Pacific Coast, the Coast Guard has a role in this too, right? Because you were referring to the air and marine operations, which is part of CBP. It's sort of the Border Patrol's planes and boats, but it's not. Anyway, it's an organizational thing. But the Coast Guard also has a alien interdiction office or department or something. I assume that's mainly Florida, Bahamas. That's where they work. But did you see any evidence of that in California?
So I didn't see any Coast Guard assets that were in the nearby waters. And it's important to note that most of these, Pangas and Go Fast boats that are running migrants up are sticking close to the coast, to that section of the coast where the Coast Guard doesn't generally venture. Now, of course, there are Coast Guard helicopters. I saw plenty of Coast Guard helicopters that were deployed. But just in a funny anecdote, apparently one group of these migrants managed to make it all the way up to Camp Pendleton, which is a Marine Corps base.
Right.
Apparently, the Marines were none too amused by their presence in this area. But yeah, no, I did see Coast Guard choppers, but I saw a lot of AMO choppers that were flying around in that coastal region and along the border itself.
Right.
So it's locked down. You know, it's how nature says don't cross.
You could change the lyrics of the Marine Corps hymn, you know, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Camp Pendleton. It's got to be a thing if you're in the Marine Corps and then you see a Marine landing on your own base of illegal aliens. That's like something they'd use in a movie. Anyway, I want to wrap it up here because you guys need to move on. This was a good look at sort of what's going on at two different parts of the border. And the interesting thing, of course, is, you know, long time ago when I started in this, San Diego and El Paso were where all illegal immigration basically happened. And, you know, that changed. Tucson sector and Arizona got very busy. Southern Texas got real busy. But the fact that the two areas that years ago were like the whole of illegal immigration for all intents and purposes on the southern border now basically have, you know, nobody crossing, really is striking evidence of the efficacy of just changing policies, that this wasn't what we saw over the last 4 years was not because of some natural forces we were unable to control, climate change, poverty, blah, blah, blah. It was policy. And you change the policy and you change the reality at the border. So we're going to have some pieces by you guys on this that we'll link to. But in the meantime, thanks for coming on, and we will keep an eye on what's going on at the border. So thank you, Art, and thank you, Todd, and be careful out there.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
To get a little more information about the part of the border that Todd was talking about, we've posted a video that he put together. Not super long, I forget, 8 or 10 minutes, something like that, but it's, it kind of gives you a visual version of what he was talking about on the show. The last thing I wanted to just draw your attention to is this issue of the Alien Enemies Act. Our George Fishman has written a good deal about it, and we'll have a link or two in the show notes, but it came into the news because there was a load of deportees, Venezuelans, being flown to El Salvador. And there was an issue about whether a judge enjoining the deportation of these people was able to do it because the order didn't come out until they were already outside the United States. But the issue still has to be litigated. The administration is not sending out any more people based on the Alien Enemies Act. But it's an issue that's important. If you want to know more about it, please read George's writing about it. But the very short version of it is that this is one of the Alien and Sedition Acts from the late 1700s, the only one that wasn't repealed because everybody, both Jefferson's side and John Adams's side, agreed that it was a good idea. And so what it does is it allows the detention and removal of enemy aliens in time of war. In other words, people who are citizens of, say, Italy during World War II were detained and some of them removed based on this. And the point is they don't go before a judge. They don't get to make asylum claims, none of that stuff. It simplifies and speeds the process of removing people. And the Trump administration is interpreting the law in a novel way, but one that's plausible given that war is different, because the law envisions Congress declaring war, but it also says that it can apply in cases of invasion or what's called predatory incursion. And if there are citizens of the country doing that, then you can apply this law and basically deport them quickly. And so the question that is going to be before the courts, ultimately the Supreme Court will have to decide, is, have the changes in the way war is handled made this law still applicable or not applicable? Because Congress hasn't declared a war since, I believe, 1942, Romania and Bulgaria as part of World War II. So the point is, it's been more than 80 years before Congress has declared a war, and I'm pretty sure we've had several wars in the interim. And so the administration's claim is that some of these transnational gangs are engaging in what amounts to a predatory incursion, in the words of the law, against the United States, and that they're connected in a way with the activities of the state. You can't use this against any illegal alien. But the point is, the contention is that the Venezuelan government actually removed these people to come to the United States, and therefore their illegal criminal activities are, in a sense, tied up with the government, and that therefore this law that speeds up deportation, makes it simpler, is applicable in their cases. There's a good argument to make for that. There are, frankly, plausible arguments to make against it, too, and this is why it's going to have to be litigated, but it is going to be an issue that is going to be in the news for quite some time now. In any case, if you want to learn more about this and understand what the news coverage is going to be about, and frankly probably understand it better than some of the reporters given the quality of reporting on immigration, take a look at some of George Fishman's writing on the Alien Enemies Act. That's it for this week's Parsing Immigration Policy. Thanks to Brian Griffith, our producer, for his efforts. Thanks to all of you for listening, and please tune in next week.